We've made it. It's July. It's half through 2020. Like, we made it. Who would have thought? Not me. Hi friends, I'm Liz from Liz's Books, and I am going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag today. So this tag is basically just a way to talk about the books that I have read so far this year, the ones that I've liked and disliked, ones that have surprised me, etc. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first question is, how much have you read this year? I have read, I think, 36 books out of my 65 book goal for Goodreads, which I think is pretty good. 36 is like basically the halfway mark, and we're half through the year, so hopefully, you know, with school starting the second semester, I'll hopefully be able to keep up with my goal. Usually I go a little over, so I'm assuming that I'll probably do that again. But, you know, I'm on a pretty good track right now. I'm kind of reading a little bit slower than I usually am in the summer, but it's okay. We're gonna get there. The second question is, what have you been reading lately? What kind of genres have you been reading? Personally, I've been actually trying to read a little bit different genres than I'm used to. I usually just stick to fantasy because that's what I enjoy reading most, which I still am reading a lot of, but I've also started reading some, you know, just normal fiction, some contemporary, YA contemporary books, which I don't usually read. I've gotten a couple historical fiction novels that I am planning to read. It's weird that, like, I haven't read that much historical fiction because I love history, so it doesn't really make any sense, so I am going to try to be reading more of that as the year goes on. And I've also been reading some rom-coms, stuff like that, so yeah, I've been reading a very wide variety of genres, but I hope to continue to broaden that variety as the year goes on. Next question is, what is the best book you've read so far in 2020? And for this, I chose None Other Than Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. I mean, what did y'all expect? I already have a review of this book up my channel where I just gush about it for like 20 minutes, so y'all already know that I love this book. I mean, I've been waiting for this book forever, and it came out this year, and I had such high expectations, and it exceeded those expectations, so I mean, that's really rare. And if you don't know, this is the first book in Cassandra Clare's new trilogy, The Last Hours, and it's just wonderful. It's so good. I can't talk about it without getting giddy because it was perfect. A+. 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 The next question is, what is the best sequel you read so far in 2020? And for this question, I chose A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. That. At the beginning of the year, I had read A Curse So Dark and Lonely, and it was just really surprising how much I liked it because I hadn't read a lot of new YA fantasy just because I had felt that a lot of the books I had been reading in that genre were becoming kind of redundant, which is sad because it's one of my favorite genres. But then I picked this up and it was just super refreshing. I really liked it and I was really surprised by how much I liked it. And then I read the second one, Of Heart So Fierce and Broken, and I just like fell in love with it. Like, the first one was good, but this one was just everything I like in a fantasy novel. It just had the romance, it had the action, and it was just, this one was actually even more surprising because for some reason, I just didn't really expect to like the sequel that much. But y'all, if you haven't read this series yet, it is amazing, and I think it's underrated. And the next one I think is coming out in January 2021, so if you want to get on that, read these. They're really, really good, and they're super fun to read too, so read them. Next question is, what is the most anticipated release that you have for the next part of the year? And I actually have 2 books for this one just because, I mean, I have many anticipated releases. The first one is Instant Karma by Marissa Meyer. Marissa Meyer is probably my favorite author of all time. Every book she writes is just my favorite. They're amazing. And Instant Karma is a contemporary, which she actually hasn't written before, so I'm super excited to read it. It looks super cute, and it's just exactly the thing I need. And it's just like, a Marissa Meyer contemporary just sounds so wonderful, and I love all her books. Like, she never lets me down with any of her books, so I'm really, really, really excited for that one. The next book that I'm super excited for to come out in 2020 is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. It is the 4th book in his Stormlight archive, and it's gonna be a giant book. It's gonna be amazing. I'm so excited. I'm really glad that I read Stormlight archive this year because usually he has at least like 2 years in between each book he comes out with just because they're giant. So I read them this year, so I only had to wait like, I don't know, like 6 months or something because it comes out in November, and I just read the series. So I'm really glad that I read them recently, so I didn't have to wait too long, but I don't know. I'm really excited. It's going to be amazing. Storm the Archive is one of the best series I've ever read. Next question is, what have been your biggest disappointments so far in 2020? And I actually have multiple for this question, so kind of cheating, but whatever. So the first one I have is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And okay, when I say it's a disappointment, I don't mean that I didn't like this book. I thought this book was fabulous. It's really beautifully written. I mean, it's good. It's a good book, and like I would recommend it to people. But it was disappointing just because I had such high expectations for it. Like, multiple of my friends had read it and were like, oh my gosh, like you have to read it. Like, it's just so good. So I was expecting it to just like blow me away. But when I read it, I was just not blown away. I was just a little disappointed. I don't know. It was just, I think it was just the way that people had been kind of selling it to me. Like, and also just the way this book is marketed. It's kind of marketed as just like a, I don't know, a romance or like enemies to lovers romance. And it's not at all, which is fine. I don't care that it's not a romance. I mean, it has romance in it. But it's just, for me personally, I did not care about the romance in this book. And I didn't really care about the main two characters that much, which is kind of sad because I really like reading books where I enjoy the characters. I mean, characters for me are kind of what sells a book for me, and that's just kind of one of my favorite parts about reading is connecting to characters. So I just couldn't really fully love this book because I just didn't really care about the main two characters. And that's not to say that they aren't bad characters, I just didn't care about them. And there were some side characters that I did care about, but like overall the characters were just not it. But that's not to say that like this book isn't good. Like, this book has a really wonderful plot, and the writing, y'all, the writing, like, it's just, you read it and you just feel like you're there. It's so beautiful, and I just want y'all to read it just to know what it's like. Just, oh, it's good. It's good. But overall, it just was a little disappointing for me just because it didn't live up to the expectations that I had for it, and also just didn't live up to the perceived notions of the book that I had, which I guess I was kind of judging the book before I read it, but, you know, overall, it was a good book, just not something that blew me away. The next disappointing book I have for 2020 is The Tyrant's Tomb by Rick Riordan. When I say that this book was disappointing, again, I don't mean that it was a bad book or that I didn't enjoy it. It just didn't really wow me, in which I wanted to be wowed. So I read this book right after reading The Burning Maze by Rick Riordan. Please excuse like the Walmart sticker and the price tag, but I couldn't get it off. It's one of the stickers that just doesn't come off, but it's fine. I read this book right after reading The Burning Maze, and The Burning Maze was just like, I'm not gonna say what happens, but it was just, it hit me kind of hard, and it was just very unexpected. A lot of things happened in the book that were like, you know, building up to something really big. And then I read this book, and I honestly just don't remember what happens. Like, I read this book I think in January, and I don't remember like the main plot line or like the big thing that happened in this book. I remember really small parts, but I just couldn't tell you like the big things that happened in this book. I don't know. It just doesn't. And again, like, it wasn't that this book was bad, it just didn't really feel like a, you know, pre-finale, because the next book in the series is the last book, and this is the fourth book, the fifth book is the last book. And I don't know, I was just expecting something bigger. I don't know. Just overall, the Trials of Apollo series as a whole has not really lived up to the expectations that I want it to. It's not that it's bad, it's just overall the plot itself isn't really wowing me. The characters are great. I really like Apollo as a protagonist. It's just the plot itself isn't really capturing me the way that his other plots have captured me. So again, this book is not bad. The series is really fun to read. Like, I truly enjoy reading it. It's just this book in particular wasn't really what I wanted it to be. So next question is, what has been your biggest surprise to 2020? And for this question, I chose Every Last Word by Tamara Ireland Stone. This book was gifted to me by my best friend, and she really loved it. So when I read it, you know, I was expecting to like it, but it is a YA contemporary, and I just usually don't love YA contemporary. I just don't really connect that much with the characters and the plot. I just usually read it and like it, but it's never like, wow, that was my favorite book ever. But when I read this, I just loved it. It was so good and just so well written, and I don't know, it's just really surprising. I read it in like a day, and it was just like, whenever you read a book and you start reading it and you're like, oh wow, like I'm actually like, I really like this book and you just don't want to stop reading. Like, that was this for me. And I just hadn't really felt like that in a long time when I read this. So yeah, this book was definitely a surprise. I'd always kind of seen it around Goodreads and stuff like that. I just never really thought that it would really be a book for me. But yeah, it's really amazing. If you haven't read it, you definitely should. If you haven't read this book yet, it is about a girl named Sam who has OCD and just how she navigates her life with it and her high school experience. So it's really good. It just warmed my heart. I think you should read it. It was very surprising. So the next question is, what is a new author that you have found and loved and become one of your favorites? For this question, I kind of cheated and chose the author that I've kind of had like a renewed love for, because I just haven't really had that many new authors that have just really stood out to me. The author is Brandon Sanderson, and in particular, I have really just grown to love him a lot more with his Stormlight Archives series. I have already read his Mistborn trilogy a long time ago, I think in 8th grade, and I also have read Skyward and Starlight really recently, and also I think his like Steelheart series a long time ago. I recently read this series and just like, I already loved Brandon Sanderson a lot, but just this series just made me just like amazed by his like talent. It's just so good, and like just the way that he builds his worlds and characters. Like, one thing, okay, I'm putting this down because they're too heavy. One thing I really love about the Stormlight Archive is just the way that he makes his characters and his plot both so strong. Because I find a lot of times in books it's really either vice versa. Sometimes the character's really strong, sometimes the plot is really strong, but usually one suffers as the other is strong. But it's not the case in any of Brandon Sanderson's books. Like, I just, like, specifically in the Stormlight Archives, it's just so amazing how he's able to create this world that just feels like real, but also characters that feel real at the same time, and they just both are so strong. And that's kind of why I just think Brandon Sanderson is like just one of my favorite authors now, just because I think that he has just such great talent, and I'm so excited to see where he goes with this series and just with his career in general. So the next question is, what is your newest fictional crush? And I mean, so many, but I had to choose Christopher Lightwood from Chain of Gold. Like, he's just not that big of a character in this book, but like the first time I read it, like I loved him, but then the second time I read it, I was just like, I just love him. He's just so sweet and just like out there, and I love him, and I want more. I want more Christopher Lightwood and Chain of Iron. Like, please give me a man who talks about culturing bacteria. Like, A+. I love him. The next question is, who is your newest favorite character this year? And I actually have multiple answers to this question just because so many characters have been amazing this year. First one I want to talk about is Kaladin from the Stormlight Archives. He's just such a good character. Like, Brandon Sanderson did such a good job of just making you love him. He's just, I love him. Like, would do anything to protect him. Amazing. Like, his character development from this book to the third book, and like that's the thing, like we're only on the third book in this series and he's already had so much development, and it's just, I love him. I love him so much. He's next thing I want to talk about, I mean, y'all probably so sick of me bringing this book up, but like I have to, because Cordelia Carstairs, like I think she is right below Tessa Gray for me in terms of like my favorite Shadowhunter characters. Like, she is just, she's so awesome. She's so awesome and just amazing. I want to be like her role model. Like, she's so cool. And she's just so brave and wonderful. Cordelia Carstairs, guys. Cordelia Carstairs. The next character I want to talk about is another Cassie Clare character, and that is Simon Lewis from The Mortal Instruments. This is kind of a weird answer just because I've already read The Mortal Instruments like 5 years ago, but upon rereading these books, I don't know, I just didn't appreciate Simon that much when I was younger, but now I was reading them and I just like, he is like such a wonderful character, and I didn't really realize how much of a role, a giant role, like he's basically a protagonist, like he's one of the main protagonists in the series, and I just never really realized how much of a role he played in The Mortal Instruments, and just like, I just love him, and he is such a fabulous character. Like, I think he's honestly, like, now one of my favorite characters of all time, just because he's so, like, loyal and wonderful, and I love him. And also, like, in Tales of Shadowhunter Academy, like, amazing. Amazing. The next question is, what is, like, an underrated gem that you've read recently? Personally, I don't really read that many, like, underrated books that no one talks about. One book that did come to mind was Sadie by Courtney Summers. I just haven't really heard that many people talk about this book. It wasn't even on my radar until one of my friends recommended this to me. And again, it's a thriller, so I just don't read that many thrillers. I don't think I've ever even read one. But not because I don't think they're good, it's just something that I don't normally read. But I read this and it was just really good. And I'm just surprised that not more people have talked about it, especially on BookTube. I just never really hear anyone mention it. But it was really good, and I hope that more people talk about it because I think that it had a lot of interesting things to talk about and a lot of interesting topics. The next question is, what have been your rereads this year? I'm a person who loves to reread my books. I just love revisiting my favorite stories and my favorite characters. The biggest series that I reread this year is The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare, and I've just been doing a giant reread of all the Shadowhunter Chronicles. I reread The Mortal Instruments, The Infernal Devices, I'm currently rereading The Dark Artifices. I also reread Chain of Gold and Tales of Shadowhunter Academy, and I'm going to read Ghost of the Shadow Market. It's just been so fun to reread all of the Shadowhunter Chronicles. After I read Chain of Gold, I just really wanted to reread all of them, and I've actually never reread The Mortal Instruments, so it was fun to revisit that because it's been, I think, like 4 or 5 years since I have read it. So yeah, it's just been really fun. I'm on Lord of Shadows right now and having a great time. Next series that I reread this year is the To All the Boys I Loved Before series by Jenny Han. Honestly, like, don't remember rereading this just because it happened pre-corona. I read these books just because they just are so fun and happy, and they just give me such a warm feeling. I've honestly probably read them like 4 times, but I just needed to read them again, and I did. So, like, this series is just something that I always go back to when I need a little pick-me-up, and the movie, like, anytime I'm sad, I just rewatch To All the Boys I Loved Before because it's just so sweet and happy. The next 2 books that I read this year were The Hidden Oracle by Rick Riordan and The Dark Prophecy. I wanted to catch up on this series. I had stopped after The Dark Prophecy, not because I just didn't want to read them, I just kind of like forgot that these books are coming out, and so I wanted to reread these 2 just so I could continue on with the series and so that I kind of knew what was happening in the next 2 books. And I'm glad I reread them. I really enjoyed them. Like I said earlier, I really like the series. It's just not gripping me as much as the other series have. I don't know. I just think the plot isn't as strong as the other series. It's really funny and really enjoyable to read, and I'm really excited for the last book. But overall, it's just like it's just not getting me as much as this other series. But hopefully the last book is really good and I have high expectations for it. So the next question is, what is a book that made you cry? At this point, y'all probably like, shut up, that guy's Claire, but like, I'm gonna bring it up again because what's a book that made me cry? This book. Now, I reread this book, I think, for the 4th time this year, maybe 4th time, definitely 4th time. And like, I can't even think about this book without like tearing up because like I read it 4 times and every time it just gets worse. Like, I reread The Mortal Instruments, like anytime any of those characters were mentioned or like I just would start tearing up because I cannot handle it. I can't. I don't know if it was just because I had like super sad music on when I was reading this book, but like I was a mess. Like, it was like bad, gross. I had Kleenex all over. It was rough. It was really rough. And it was also like 2 a.m. and I was like trying to be like quiet, you know, so I didn't wake anyone up with me crying. But like, y'all, if you read this book, you know that you just can't read this book without gross sobbing. But yeah, this book once again made me cry for like the millionth time. So the next question is, what is a book that made you happy this year? And for this question, I am choosing, once again, another Cassie Clare book, Clockwork Prince. I think it's safe to say, like, this book is at least, like, in the top 3 books of just my favorite of all time because it's just so perfect and everything is just, it just makes me, every time I read it, I just get so happy because I just feel this is cheesy, but I feel at home. And it's about like my favorite 3 characters ever, and I just love the atmosphere, I love the drama, I love the angst, the humor, everything about it just makes me so happy, and every time I reread it, I never get bored of it. So this is a book that made me extremely happy, at the same time as making me cry, but you know, happy tears. No, not really, they were very sad tears, but I do love this book so much. and it just never fails to make me happy. The next question is, what is the most beautiful book you've gotten this year? And I was going to choose Chain of Gold again, but then I realized that I've talked about Chain of Gold like 4 times in this video, and I just can't. I can't do it again. But I do have another book that was very beautiful that I got this year, and that is Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the 3rd book and finale in the Folk of the Air series that came out in January of this year. And this cover, y'all, is like, all of the covers in this series are beautiful, but like this one in particular, like, I don't know, but it's just like the snake and like the flower and the crown and the ice, and also this, like, this book is beautiful. And it was really a good book too. So yeah, this is a really beautiful book. All of her covers are super pretty, but that is it for the mid-year book freakout tag. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope that I continue to read a lot of amazing books. I'm super excited for all the books that are going to come out this year, and I'm really excited to see where my reading journey takes me. So thank you for watching. Bye! The next